Retro.
Hi, this is Vanessa Marshall, voice of Hera and Rook Cast, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Their behavior is continually unexpected.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krabs.
And this episode is part 3 in our monthly series focusing on The Force Awakens as we celebrate its 10th anniversary. But before we get back to Jakku, Jay, I want to go ahead and remind everybody where we can be found on social media.
Why does everyone want to go back to Jakku? We are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
All right, the dish is lying, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, and we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So once again, this is part 3 in our Force Awakens series, and we'll be getting to the segment that runs from 23 minutes and 40 seconds to 36 minutes and 38 seconds here in just a bit. Normally, I'd be introducing a guest right about now, but as I've been saying for the past few episodes, Jay and I've kind of had to keep our recording schedule fluid to accommodate a few things that are going on for each one of us this month. So we weren't really able to concretely set one day we might be recording this. So we also were not trying to get a guest at the same time, but have no fear. We'll be back next month with another great guest or two as we continue with the series. So once again, this picks up at 23 minutes and 40 seconds, and we see Kylo Ren's Star Destroyer, and then Phasma and Hux are discussing FN 2187, who we now know as Finn, and they make sure to point out that this is someone who had no prior issues, no real disciplinary actions or anything on his record, and so this is something of a surprise. I do kind of like, Jay, that while they're looking at his file, there's like baby pictures almost of Finn that's there on that little screen that they're looking at, him as a kid in that regard. So later in this segment, when Hux is arguing with Kylo, he talks about how his soldiers are trained from birth. And so I think this really just goes to underscore that point.
Yes, and it truly does hit home quite a bit more because a lot of times when you hear about things like that, and obviously the Jedi were the same, where they would take children when they were young and identified as Force users, but just the fact that they had this file on him all the way back to that point, and that they were so diligent in the First Order with keeping those records and making sure that they were, just so updated all the time or whatever was, it was really impressive, actually.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you just brought up as an aside, that, the Jedi also take children as babies and bring them up under a certain belief system here. So what's the difference? Are the Jedi, this is kind of a devil's advocate type question, are the Jedi any better than the First Order, or what do you think?
Well, again, as Obi-Wan would say, it's all from a certain point of view, right? I mean, when you're looking at the reasons why they conscripted these children, if you will, what was their motivation behind it? And for the First Order, they thought that they were doing the galaxy a favor. And, having the protection of these soldiers and being able to train them the way that they wanted to and mold them the way that they wanted to. And with the Jedi, obviously, they thought that theirs was more of altruistic motives in protecting the galaxy. But they both kind of think they're protecting the galaxy in some way, shape, or form.
I'd go a step further than that. The Jedi they don't take the kids against the parents' will in that regard. They approach the parents, they explain what the situation, and it is the parents ultimately that surrender them. Whereas the First Order kidnaps these children. And that's one of the things we find out in The Rise of Skywalker with Jaina, is that, they basically were all kidnapped. That's what Lando's doing. He's looking for his daughter in all of this.
Right.
And second, it is the First Order stormtroopers are programmed. Kylo Hux says that very clearly. That is an interesting choice of words, Where and then they're also stripped of their identity and given numbers, because if we think back a scene or two, when Poe asks Finn what his name is, he says, FN 2187, and he FN 2. Well, I'm not using it, and he's like, well, that's the only name they ever gave me, right? They,
Mhm.
Finn had to have some other name when he was born before he was ripped away from his parents, and given a number in that
Right,
situation.
right.
So yeah,
Yeah.
where the Jedi let the kids keep their names. It's just that they teach them no attachment in that regard. So
Mhm.
I guess my conclusion is, while there's some similarities, I don't think it's an equivalency.
Well, and here's the crazy thing too is that obviously we had originally the Republic who
Mhm,
used clones, and the clones were created, birthed, and given numbers. And then
mhm.
when the Empire took over, those stormtroopers were basically they volunteered to serve the Empire. And so then after that fell, then the First Order was like, maybe the Jedi were onto something, and maybe we can morph the two ideas together like we did with the clones. We'll give them numbers, but we'll steal them from birth.
Well, it's kind of the reverse clone thing too, right? Because
Right. Yeah,
the clones
exactly.
the clones are created and given numbers, but then they pick their names.
Mhm.
Whereas the First Order strips them of their names, gives them numbers, and then doesn't let them develop any individuality in that
Exactly.
regard. So,
And that's what
I
I'm saying, like, they're just kind of taking from what didn't work in the past and trying to morph it all together.
right, right. So for a segment that has almost nothing to do with the First Order, other than this scene and a brief scene we got later, we just spent 5 minutes talking about First Order stormtroopers. So we will move on here. We find Finn waking up on Jakku. He is in his ejection chair, which has got a parachute stretched out on the ground behind him. And he wakes up, and then he finds the wreckage of the TIE fighter that he and Poe used to escape. He pulls Poe's jacket out right before the burning TIE fighter is sucked into the sand and blows up in this regard. So, this is, of course, part of this is what we saw in the first teaser trailer that came out for the movie. This is how we were introduced to Finn at the very
Mhm.
beginning here. So, what observations do you have about this snippet of the segment?
Yeah, that's such an iconic shot because,
Mhm,
as you pointed out, that was what really set the stage for us as fans to go, "Ooh, what's this gonna be all about?" And stepping back, I thought, just a quick little fun trivia is that the First Order tech or officer says that they were in the Goyzone Badlands is where they were coming down. So I thought,
mhm.
"Oh, that's really cool." I never really paid attention to the pinpoint of the location where the tie went down, and so Finn watching this TIE fighter sinking into the sand, you would think that he would have backed up a little bit more. I know I would have. I wouldn't have stayed that close to it for fear that I would have been sucked up in the whole thing as well.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. But, so he gets Poe's jacket, and then he ends up marching off across the desert here. And one of the things that The Force Awakens gets criticized for is how similar it is in narrative structure to A New Hope. That hits a lot of same beats and stuff like that. Okay, it's also got plenty of its own individual moments here, but I just this time around, as he's making his way across the desert, he starts stripping off all of his stormtrooper armor, which is interesting because I believe the stormtrooper armor is supposed to have some sort of environmental control built into it, but I suppose he's getting rid of it so he's not standing out as a stormtrooper in that
Mhm.
regard. But he eventually comes across Nema Outpost, and he looks down on it much the way the Obi-Wan, Luke, and the droids did when they got to Mos Eisley on Tatooine. I couldn't help myself. I was like, a wretched hive of scum and villainy. But
Nice.
the whole thing does remind me of scenes that we got from A New Hope, with Finn marching across the desert. It's kind of like when R2 and 3PO were lost in the desert. And then again, that arrival at Nemo Outpost was somewhat similar, at least, to when they had that overlook on Mos Eisley when Obi-Wan Kenobi was talking about how, this place can be a little rough. And Nemo Outpost is a little rough.
Mhm. Oh, it absolutely is. And when Finn is striding across the desert and he's just pulling off his stormtrooper armor piece by piece, he walks a few steps and then you see another piece fall to the sand. walks a few steps, does the same thing. To me, that's a lot more symbolic than anything, that he's shedding his old self,
Mhm.
and that he's kind of emerging from his cocoon, because you're right. Why would he get rid of some of those things? Because they would be environmentally controlled or whatever. But perhaps they didn't invest in them as much as they needed to with the First Order as well. We've seen the Empire being really cheap with armor and whatnot. So maybe it wasn't as good as we think.
Perhaps, perhaps.
Yeah.
So he, we get another shot back on the Star Destroyer, and this time it's Hux and Kylo Ren, and Hux is kind of yipping at Kylo's heels and reminding him that the Supreme Leader wanted BB-8 captured, but they could destroy the droid if they must. And then Kylo starts taunting Hux about how good his troopers really are. And, it's like, they certainly seem capable of committing high treason. And then
Mm.
he throws out there, getting back to what we were just saying about clones, is like, maybe Snoke should have used a clone army instead. And this is where Hux snaps back and says that his men are exceptionally trained and programmed from birth. And then Hux cautions Kylo Ren about not letting his personal interests get in the way. Of course, Kylo snaps at him, like, bring me back the droid. And so it's a small, very quick scene, but I think there are a couple things to unpack. We already talked a bit about the stormtroopers and how they're programmed and raised from birth. So we don't need to really cover that again. But there also is this notion, we don't know who Kylo Ren is yet at this point in the movie. We don't know that he's been solo. Because we know now, because we've seen this movie a couple dozen times. But
Mm.
this is like a clue, because we know BB-8's carrying the map to Luke Skywalker. Finn knows it, and he's about to tell Rey that, and the like. But there's, when Hux throws out there, don't let your personal interests get in the way. It's a clue, but we just don't really have any way yet of knowing what it means. But do you have any memories about how this scene hit you, if at all, like the first time you saw it, or is there any other observations you have upon this rewatch?
Well, one thing that hit me with this rewatch, and again, mirroring A New Hope, I guess, in this way, is that at the time that The Force Awakens came out, we didn't know what the Knights of Ren were. We didn't know the backstories, and it wasn't developed yet. There was just not a whole lot to go on. It's it was just a name, Kylo Ren. It's a name. And so Hux, I picked up on, just simply calls him Ren. He
Mm-hmm.
says, "Ren, do not let your personal interests get in the way." And it's very similar to how when Obi-Wan met Darth Vader on the Death Star, he says, when they say, "Yes, I'm now, when I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master." And Obi-Wan says, "Only a master of evil, Darth."
Mm-hmm.
So he calls him by the title,
Yeah.
not by the name. And we didn't know anything about the rule of two back then or anything of that nature. So that's what hit me on this watching, which very trivial and very small, I know, but I just thought that was an aha kind of moment for me.
Yeah, it is interesting, because the other thing that stands out to me, and that you made that observation, is that, right, Darth Vader, Darth is the title, Vader is the name. Kylo Ren, Ren is the title, Kylo is the name. So it's flipped for those two. But
Yeah,
similarly, it's like you can't take anything for granted when it comes to Star Wars naming conventions, because Din Djarin, up
right.
until the very end of The Mandalorian, we had all assumed that Din's first name was Din, the last name was Djarin, and it turns out Din is the surname, and that. So yeah, you just never know when it comes to Star Wars names, that what everything is, a title, a name, a surname, or where we stand on that stuff.
So true.
Hmm. So back on Jakku, Finn finally gets into the outpost, and as he's making his way through the various tents and stalls, he's begging for water, and he's getting barked at in a bunch of different alien languages. And he's, water, water. He's desperate. He's dying of thirst, and all of a sudden he hears splashing water. He turns around. He sees a Hapabor basically lapping up water out of a reservoir. This is one of those moments of whimsy that I think just, it's one of the things that contributes to how great Star Wars is. It's like, this is not the same things a dewback, but it's essentially like there for the same reason a dewback was in A New Hope.
Sure, a beast of burden,
Yeah.
and the fact that Finn is just so, like, as you said, so desperate for water that he's willing he starts lapping it up, and then he's like, "Oh, what is this?" And then decides, "I don't care, I'm just thirsty enough that I I will drink what's coming out of the other end at this point, I just need something."
Yeah. And the Happy doesn't want him there, so he
No, he
smacks
just
him with his snout and knocks him over.
"This is
So
my watering hole, get your own watering hole."
yeah. But the other thing is, I'll have to go back and check this out, but my memory is that when this movie was coming out, they had a gigantic Happy prop on set, and then and it may have had some puppetry involved in it, but they clearly used some CGI on this thing
Oh, yeah.
to bring it to life in the movie. But again, I just love the fact that they would have built one and had it on set for, they didn't have to. They just could have put some blue screen up there behind it and then, inserted the thing later, but they went to that trouble.
Yes, yes, and it's so funny because I think to myself, whenever I think of that puppetry, the first thing that enters my mind is Ace Ventura, Pet
Oh,
Detective. And what if the puppeteer comes out of the end of the Happabore?
right.
Sorry, my that's where my mind goes.
That's okay. That's okay. So after Poe gets some water, he turns around and he sees the thugs that Unkar Plutt contacted to get the droid from Rey. They show up and they try to get the droid. They throw a canvas bag over BB-8, and then one of them grabs Rey from behind, and Poe is about to run to the rescue, but notices that she doesn't really have any trouble handling herself, and fights them off, and so he kind of pulls up short, but it's not before she frees BB-8 from the bag, and he turns and recognizes the fact that Finn's got Poe's jacket on and sounds an alarm. So Rey starts to give chase, and he runs off on this. So this is such a fun meeting between these two. And, it's got
Mhm.
multiple steps here. He was trying to do the chivalrous thing, like, oh, she's being attacked, I need to go help, and he didn't even stop and think about this. And this is also the character that he couldn't be part of the massacre back on the Church of the Force scene that starts the movie, and so he left the First Order for that. But it just kind of just demonstrates that although he doesn't want to get involved in the bigger war that's about to come between the Resistance and the First Order, he still has a sense of what's right and what's wrong, and was ready to go help Rey out in this moment.
Mhm. Mhm. And I have an observation and a question for you as well.
Mhm.
So the observation is, as you were saying, when Ray is able to handle herself and everyone else in the little outpost there is pretty much nonplussed, like,
Mhm.
yeah, they're kind of getting out of the way, but they're not getting involved. And so as Finn is getting ready to run to Ray's rescue, quote unquote, he stops up short, as you said, and then he kind of like looks around and takes inventory, like, "Is anyone else seeing this? Like, is this normal for this place?" kind of
That's a
thing,
good point. Yeah.
which I thought was interesting. And then the question I guess that I have is we've often, and you pointed it out just now, thought of the way that Finn was reacting to Rey's attackers as thinking he was being chivalrous. And
Mhm.
as you said, there's several steps to this where he keeps wanting to take Rey's hand and, run her out of here. How does he even have any inkling of what chivalry is if he's been a first order stormtrooper all of his life and he's fought side by side with all genders, and then all of a sudden now he's seeing this person and thinking she needs to be rescued?
Well, I mean, he's probably not internally just thinking this is chivalry in this situation, except,
Mhm.
he's a stormtrooper. He was just there on Jakku and saw the village get massacred, like we were just talking about a second ago. Probably not the first atrocity he's ever seen. And he knows what, the First Order is going to do. But again, it doesn't matter how much. I think what this does is it highlights how good Finn is at his core, because,
Mhm.
Hux was just talking about how his soldiers are trained and programmed from birth. And so there should be conditioned to follow orders and stuff like that. But he knows right from wrong in this situation. Here's this woman all of a sudden being attacked by a couple of thugs. and he doesn't. That's just him being good. It overrides
Right.
anything that the First Order tried to teach him in that regard. Here,
Nature
but the other
versus
thing,
nurture. Yes.
yeah, I mean, the other thing is like, I made the joke, when he gets to Nema Outpost and he's looking at it from a distance, it's like, wretched hive of scum and villainy. It absolutely is, for the reason that you're just talking about. There Rey was getting attacked. No one else was coming to help. They're just
Right.
kind of walking around, going to their business. It's, that's like, oh, another day at Nema Outpost. Someone's
Exactly.
attacking Rey. So they want
Yep.
a droid. Yeah, I guess they could take her. But yeah, so definitely, not only is it the First Order, it's just him standing out in this crowd on top of
Yes,
it.
for
So
sure.
Rey goes to pursue Finn and he runs off, and then I guess he goes in a circle because all of a sudden she smacks him across the jaw with her staff. And then BB rolls up and gets his pound of flesh by shocking him with his little welder. And I love Finn's response. It's like, stop that. Just
Yes.
every time. But then, Rey accuses him of being a thief and says that, that jacket belongs to this droid's master. And then that's when Finn puts two and two together, which is, oh, Poe Dameron, yeah, he didn't make it. He was killed. They basically got killed by the First Order as they were trying to escape. And BB-8 kind of rolls off dejected in this case. So here's the thing. The lie is born in this instance. Rey thinks Finn is with the Resistance, and Finn lets her think that. And, she kind of gets excited by the whole thing. It's like, so you're with the Resistance. And he's like, yes, I am with the Resistance. He's a lousy liar. He's got a good heart, but his lying needs some work. And, I've never met a Resistance provider before. Well, this is what we look like. Some of us, others look different. The
Love that.
clumsiness here is just charming.
Love that.
Yeah. But what do you think about this? This notion that he's just kind of letting her think that.
Well, first of all, backing up to Rey being so incredibly protective of BB-8.
Mhm.
And, here she was ready to just send him off on his way. Who knows what, that like the day before, hours before, or whatever. Like, Nema Outpost is that way, don't go to the sinking fields. And now all of a sudden, she has rejected all of those portions. And now she is basically willing to beat the heck out of somebody for impersonating his friend. And so I think that that's worth mentioning, number one. Number two, why the heck was Finn wearing that jacket and it's so hot anyway? He could have just tied it around his waist or, carried it along with him, but you would think that he would be hot. And then third, to answer your question, I think for Finn, he is so desperately wanting to fall into his quote unquote new identity that he's just now fully embracing it. Just like he had shed off all of the stormtrooper armor, now wearing Poe's jacket is his way of embracing himself into the resistance, so to speak. And so now it's kind of like he didn't even really think he was going to do that, but now he's like, okay, yeah, I guess I can be part of the resistance now that I can do that.
Except for he doesn't want to, though. I mean, he
Yeah,
wants to run away from the First
right.
Order.
Mhm.
He's the I think I think the bigger fear is that yes, I am with the Resistance. I'm definitely not with the First Order, who I just ran away from,
Mhm.
which is I think what he's more concerned about in this regard, especially since she just smacked him across the jaw when she thought he was a thief. And then she got excited by the fact that he might be with the Resistance. And then if he turns out he was actually with the First Order, that could go badly for him. But, it leads him to lie to her for some time on this, and Han
Right.
Solo, points out to us, like, women will always figure out the truth. And so, he has to fess up to
Always.
that later in this regard. But I think I just, it's getting back to one of the things you were saying is that I think it's why these two end up getting along so well is because they are kindred souls in all of this. For everything that is made out over the course of this trilogy about how Rey and Kylo, or Ben Solo, whatever you call them, are a dyad. They're opposite sides of the same coin, and soulmates or some people. No, these two here have more in common. That kernel of goodness that's at the fiber of their being in this
Mhm.
regard. They do some different things with it. Rey is holding out hope for her family to return to have a better life. Whereas Poe is like, evil is coming. I got to get out of here. But he still recognizes bad things that are happening. He does something about it in that regard, whereas, Kylo like embraces the dark side. They're just very desperately trying to embrace the dark side in all of this.
No,
That's
those are
that's
some
my
good
take.
points.
But
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And I think again, when also as Finn is telling Ray all about, oh yeah, I'm with the resistance and this BB-8 unit, he has a map that leads directly to Luke Skywalker. And
Hmm.
he's spilling the beans again, like everybody wants to tell what BB-8 is carrying. Finn or Poe tells Finn, now Finn tells Ray, and I think a lot of it is because Finn is almost like, that kid in middle school that wants to fit in and he wants to spill the tea so that he can look impressive to his new friends. And so I think that's part of it for him. But obviously, right away, Ray's just like, oh, I thought he was a myth, and just goes really hushed kind of thing, which I just, there's just something so naive, but also childlike innocence about
Hmm.
this little scene that I love.
Oh, absolutely. And the other things that I'm glad you brought that up. There's other points I'd make about that where one, Poe or Finn doesn't really believe in Luke Skywalker, even though that's what Poe told him was on this map. Two, he didn't care about Luke Skywalker and that anyone gets this map. He just wants to get away in this
Mhm.
regard. And three, it points out how he's supposed to be a soldier, not a spy. The idea that keeping this a secret, what BB-8's carrying is like that. That didn't even. He's not a spy, and he's not used to adapting some other identity like this. And you're right. I mean, he's totally. If we was in the role of a resistance fighter, he should have only revealed that to Rey if it was key to getting her help to bringing BB-8 back to the base, because BB-8 didn't tell her what it was that it was going on.
Right. Just
It's a
classified.
secret. Oh, me too. Classified, big secret.
Mhm.
That whole interaction that they had when they first met. And so, yeah, at this point, Ray had no idea that that's what BB-8 was carrying, despite the fact those two become fast friends like really quickly at this point.
Mhm. Mhm.
So they don't have long to be encouraged, excited by this before the First Order shows up. And one of the thugs that Ray beat up is pointing them out to the stormtroopers, who start firing. And as you were talking about earlier, Finn grabs Ray's hand, starts to run, and she does not like that. Why are you taking my hand?
Mhm.
Yeah. And so they go running through the outpost and they dodge the stormtroopers a few times before the stormtroopers call in the airstrike. And and then Ray's like, "Why are they shooting at me?" And Finn points out, "Well, they saw you with me. You're marked." And she's like, "Well, thanks for that." And I love his retort, "Hey, I'm not the one that chased you down with the stick." So,
Yes.
uh,
Perfect.
yeah, one of the things I think this is the best movie for it is the chemistry that John Boyega and Daisy Ridley have, and Oscar Isaac and John Boyega have in this movie, and it just comes by so naturally. And I can see this is where casting really plays a big part in the success of a movie, because I know they interviewed and auditioned hundreds and hundreds of actors for these roles, and they really did land on a good combination for them.
Oh yeah, like you said, it's very natural between them and it's obvious. And I love also how Finn is just rummaging around. He's like, "Does anybody around here have blasters?" He's
Mm-hmm.
just so
Yeah.
desperate and trying to find that. And again, there's just something very original Star Wars trilogy about this entire scene that again, it's just fun and but suspenseful, but it's still high stakes and there's, an adventure going on and it's just so much fun.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting in this movie, if we're thinking about things in the hero's journey, this is the second call to adventure that Rey has received. The first one was BB-8, and she kind of
Yeah,
brushed that off, and she refused the quest at that point, tried to send him away, but then basically said you could come, but she was not on the quest at that point. It's not till Finn shows up and proclaims to be part of the resistance, and then they start getting pursued by the stormtroopers, that she really answers that call.
true, true, good call.
Yeah. So at this point, they hear the TIE fighters coming, or at least it's Finn that recognizes that sound. And so he grabs Rey's hand again. Stop grabbing my hand.
Yeah,
It's just, and
love
they
it.
go running off. And it's like, we got to run. It's like, I can run without you taking my hand. So that was a good bit in there. It's the, I think it's an interesting message. It's, he's not doing it for any inappropriate purpose, but
Sure.
she is entitled to autonomy. And,
Mhm.
stop touching me in this regard. Why are you doing it? And what even is better is that when the TIE fighters attack and they both get sent flying because of that blaster hit right behind him, he gets knocked out. When he comes through, he looks up at her, because she crawls over there. It's like, hey, hey. And so he comes through and he's like, are you okay? And just that look on her face is like, you were the one that passed out. It's just
Yes.
like, yeah. And so she offers him a hand as opposed to
That's
just
a mhm.
taking his hand.
That's a good point. Like a nice juxtaposition because
Mhm.
she was yeah, I like that. She offers him her
Mhm.
hand.
And so he grabs it and they get up and they start running, and she does
Mhm.
not cling on to his hand. And so it's hard to make excuses for this type of behavior because it's just not generally acceptable in society. But the thing is with Finn is that he really does not know better. I mean, he's been brought up in this cloister of stormtroopers that have one job, and that's to blindly follow orders. This is a brand new type of situation to him. And so it's not him trying to inappropriately touch her, but it still is.
Well, and I think also it comes down to what you were saying before, and we were pointing out the whole nature versus nurture thing is that there's just something in him that wants to reach out and help people, but he wants to do it so badly that he maybe crosses the threshold into, like you said, just doing it because it's instinct rather than Ray who's offering it.
Yeah. Okay. This is my favorite scene. This starts my favorite scene in the entire movie, and this is the escape of the Millennium Falcon from Jakku. This and then the X-wing attack on Maz Kanata's palace are my two favorites. But I think this one wins out just because I think it's such a cool escape that the Falcon hits here. But it starts with them running into the shipyard, and Bray says they need to get to that quad jumper. Finn says we need a pilot. She's we got one, and then he asks about another ship, which we don't really see, but in like a blink and you miss it glimpse. And she says that ship is garbage, and hasn't flown in years. And then the quad jumper gets blown up right in front of them, which is also another scene that we got in the trailers. And that great, they pull up and the reactions on their face of like, oh, what are we gonna do now? And that's when uh Ray says, well, the garbage will do. And then they go running off, and then it's the Falcon. We all recognize it, and they play the little Falcon thing. Da-da-da, da-da-da. I love that. It just sets the tone perfectly in that moment.
Oh my goodness, and it's so funny because I this is my favorite scene in the entire movie as well, and I also love the X-wing scene in, Maz Kanata's castle, which is, of course, we think so much alike, but
Mhm.
I will never forget sitting there in the movie theater and seeing this because we had no idea that that's where eventually it was going to be it revealed that this is where we were gonna see the Millennium Falcon for the first time.
Mhm.
And so when she says, "The garbage will do," and then it just pans over and like you said, that music starts, I seriously, even just today rewatching this, got the chills when that happened. And when we were sitting there in the movie theater, that movie theater erupted in screams and cheers and howls because it was just and I'm sitting here getting chills right now just thinking about it because that
Yeah.
was just such a perfect reveal. They could not have done that any better.
No, I remember people clapping and cheering in the theater when I saw it for the first time as well. Actually, multiple first viewings. But they get on the Falcon, and Ray points out the gunner position to Finn. So he goes down there, and Ray heads to the cockpit and points out the ship hasn't flown in years. And then we get the synchronized, I can do this, I can do this. Finn is nervous as he gets into the gunnery station, but he's just had some practice at it. In the meanwhile, Ray has is getting ready to fire things up. And so they take off from Nema Outpost, and it's a clumsy liftoff, to be sure. The Falcon takes off and immediately bounces back down, and then it's dragging across the dirt, and it takes out that archway. Unkar Plunt comes rolling out, hey, that's mine. So, you know, it's not quite the same as blasting out of Mos Eisley, but it's memorable in its own way for, similar reason. I mean, we're just talking about the parallels between A New Hope and The Force Awakens. This is one of them here. The stormtroopers show up and basically chase them off the planet.
Right. Well, and obviously with, getting out of Mos Eisley, Han owned the Falcon. It was his ship. He knew
Hmm.
exactly how to finesse it and how to steer it and maneuver it. Whereas Rey, this is, she says, I am a pilot, but truly she's never actually done this before. She's practiced, she's read up about it, she's,
Hmm.
you know, th- thought about it and visualized it in her mind, but she's never truly done it.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll get to a conversation that they have about her pilot experience here in just a bit. But the other thing I love is that, the tarp completely comes off the Falcon and we get the new dish on it, the rectangular looking one, as opposed to the
Yeah.
circular one that we're all familiar with. But again, it just is, you said it. It was a great reveal when they were running onto it, but now seeing it take off, just another, you know, makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck type of a moment.
Truly. And the thing of it is too, is that this is the first time we've really seen a spaceship fight on land. We've
Mhm.
always seen it in space, obviously, because they're spaceships. But for it to be flying over the sands of Jakku and interacting with the tides in that was different. And I
Oh,
think
yeah.
that's one of the reasons why it's one of my favorite scenes like ever in Star Wars too.
Yeah, because, you know, some would make the comparison to the Battle of Hoth with the snow speeders and stuff like that because they are capable of going to space like that. But it's not the same thing. It's them attacking AT-ATs, it's not the chase scene that we got, which is much more reminiscent of things we saw in A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. But you're right. I mean, Finn says, stay low, it's going to confuse their tracking, which makes sense. And then we get that great shot of the Falcon taking up and doing that loop as it spins on its axis, which we got from the trailer that was shown at Celebration before the movie came out.
Mhm.
And and the thing is, like, when they hit that part, or actually was it in the teaser? I think it was in the
I
teaser.
think it was
I
in
can't
the
remember.
teaser, yeah, I think
Yeah,
you're right.
but it's just they do it with the full Star Wars theme, is blasting when they showed that in that teaser, and I remember just as it levels back out, the 2 TIE fighters come screaming by it, shooting up a blast. We had no idea who was piloting it in the teaser when we saw it, and most of us assumed it was Han and Chewbacca,
Right.
but, it turns out it was Rey and Finn, and we didn't know what the backstory was there, but it's like you said, it's the pursuit across the deserts of Jakku, and it's all these great maneuvers, all these great action scenes, the great use of John Williams' music. It is just a masterful way of putting a scene together.
For sure. And I love the fact too that the 2 of them working together to try to maneuver and fire on these ties, and then as Rey is seeking cover, and Finn says, "We gotta get out of here, we need some cover," and she says, "It's coming, I hope," and then
Yeah.
she goes for the wreckage, and once again, just like we were talking about before with seeing the down star destroyers and these huge pieces of fuselage and things like that, and then she's flying through them and just trusting in that this is going to work and she's gonna be able to do this, and her maneuvering, just slamming back and forth on the throttle and steering was, again, just chills, just perfect.
Yeah. Meanwhile, BB-8's bouncing around in the back until he
And
finally
then,
sits.
like, cables.
Yep. Boop. And there's a lot of great touches here. Like, the Finn is not having a lot of success with a cannon until Rayleigh finally manages to get, the weapons and the shield going there. And then all of a sudden the targeting, so we get the classic targeting computer comes up, and then he gets that great shot on the TIE fighter. And, Ray hollers back, hey, great shot. And it's a fun bit of chemistry, the banter that happens before them. Before he hasn't been able to make any shots, and she's like, "Hey, are you gonna do anything back there?" And so they've only just met, but they're just kind of trading these barbs, and they, like you were saying, they develop some chemistry to make this escape. And it really, really works out well. The the other thing is that they go into the Super Star Destroyer, which is such a cool idea.
Yeah.
They fly past the down Star Destroyer, around the fuselage and the wreckage that you're talking about, and then they fly into the superstructure of this Super Star Destroyer. And Finn's like, are we really doing this? After his cannon has been hit and it's stuck in the forward position, which then that look on Rey's face, which was she sees like the end of the road, she's like, oh no, and she makes that harsh turn to get out, and then the maneuver to flip the Falcon over and kill the thrusters so that Finn could line up and take that shot.
Oh, so good.
Yeah, definitely so
So
good.
good. That is
Mm,
that is just I can't even tell you how phenomenal that is in my brain pan just to
mhm.
see that again and again. I could watch it all the time, every day.
Yeah. Well, it's the situation like we've talked about before is that I've seen all the Star Wars movies a lot, that it's something I will sit down and watch them intently from start to finish, especially if I haven't seen one in a while. But it's also one of those, it's like they're comfort food. I put them
Mhm.
on and I can have them on in the background, and I don't have to sit down and devote all my attention to it. Like if I'm cooking or cleaning house or whatever chores I may be doing, it's like I can look up, I know where we are in the movie, I know the dialogue, and it's great. But every time I'm watching The Force Awakens and this scene comes up, I sit down and I watch it every
Yeah,
single time.
I
It
bet.
is just so fantastic.
It is.
Um, mhm,
It is. And what I love about this scene as well is not only, as you pointed out with John Williams's music and just the perfect crescendo to this and the way that it just pauses with that suspenseful note,
mhm,
and also the fact that the free fall is so symbolic of just like a leap of faith and
mhm.
trust because Ray didn't have to say anything to Finn when she did that maneuver. He just realized, "Oh, this is what she's doing, so I can use the cannons." And they just made it happen.
Yeah, yeah. So they get out of, the atmosphere, and Finn comes up out of the gun well, Ray comes up the the cockpit. Ray comes out of the cockpit, and they start congratulating each other. They're just talking over each other. It's like, "Nice shooting. That was some flying. How'd you do that?" "I don't know. Who trained you?" "Nobody did. I've flown before, but never into space." They blah, 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 blah over, and you can see like the adrenaline hit that these two are under in this moment, how excited they are that they just made this escape. And then it like all comes like to a screeching halt when BB-8, pops up, and beep, 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 and then she turns around to comfort him and says, "Don't worry, he's with the resistance, he's going to get you home, we both will." So like I was saying a moment ago, she's answered the call at this point.
Yes.
And then she turns around to Finn and says, "I don't even know your name." And then he responds, "Finn, what's yours?" And this is the first time we get her name. She says, "I'm Ray," in this movie.
Yes. So great. And a
Mm.
couple things about this is when Ray is comforting BB-8 and says he's with the resistance, you can kind of see BB-8 kind of give Finn almost like a side eye, like, what are you
Yeah.
talking about here? Because he didn't want to say, no, he's not, no, he's not. Because
Mhm.
obviously, who knows? It could have been, some sort of a special agent or secret agent that BB-8 doesn't know about. Maybe he is, maybe he's not. So he's keeping quiet, which is a very R2D2 thing to do,
Mhm.
instead of being all like C3PO and being, "Oh, no, he's not," kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, I just thought that was really interesting. And then obviously this is the first time that Finn gets to use his name on his own.
Yeah.
He was being called that by Poe, and he was given that name, but this is the first time that he is consciously introducing himself, and again, it's just kind of one of those goosebump moments.
Yeah. The other thing is, you know, as you're saying that, I had an observation. It's like there's a hierarchy of not of naivety and experience that comes into play, and just general knowledge about this. And it's what's funny about this is that Poe, of all the characters that are going to align with the resistance before this is over, he's at the top of this pyramid right now. He's the one that's savvy. He knows how to do missions. He knows what to was going on, things like that. At the bottom at the moment is Ray on this. She
Mhm.
just took for granted that Finn is who he says he is. Finn's only right barely above her because he's been with the First Order. and he actually has real world knowledge of all these things. What's funny to me is that BB-8's even a step above both of them in this regard,
Right.
because he's served with the resistance here, and like you were saying, it's like, I can't prove it, but I don't believe that guy is who he says he is. and we'll see that the next time we get to these two, when Finn's trying to convince BB-8 to tell them where the base is. So
Right,
yeah,
right. Oh, that's
but
great.
right. So the other thing that happens here is the pipe bursts, and they're getting ready to fix it, but that's in the next segment. So yeah, that brings us to this to the end of this segment of The Force Awakens. I wish we could have had a guest for this, but now knowing that it's your favorite scene as well, I'm kind of glad it was just the two of us to get to geek out about this one together, because
Yeah.
I did the notes earlier today, and I could not wait to talk about it this evening, because, like I said, this has been my favorite for a long time. When the movie was first made available for home viewing, and I guess it would have been streaming first, and I bought a copy, and it wasn't available till like midnight that night. I stayed up long enough to watch the scene, then went to bed because I just couldn't stay up to watch the
Oh,
whole
I
thing again.
love that. Yeah.
But yeah, but I was like, I got to get to the escape from Jakku, and then I'll go to bed, and so I did.
Rightfully so. Good
Yeah.
choice. Good choice.
Yeah. All right. That'll do it for this edition of our Force Awakens series here on Podcast Stardust, as we're celebrating the movie for its 10th anniversary. We are glad that you joined us for the discussion. We hope you enjoyed it. And if so, please consider subscribing to the podcast if you haven't done so already. And then you'll get all the future editions. It should be another 8 or 9 of them before we get to the end of the year, just see how this all plays out. And then we'd also love it if you could rate and review the podcast. That does help it get noticed by others. And hey, when you leave those written reviews, they can be constructive and help us shape the show. So if you got thoughts, that's one way of doing it. And then Jay will give you some other ways of contacting us here in just a second. But I'd also like to remind you that you can find the entire back catalog of the show over on retrozap.com, as well as all the other shows that are on the podcast network. Jay, speaking of those social media contacts and the like, you want to remind everybody what those are and where else we can be reached online?
Absolutely. So we're super easy to find. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And we do have tons of Pinterest boards that you can check out. And then our other outlets where you can subscribe, listen, and also leave us some reviews and share with your friends is YouTube and YouTube Music. And then you can always drop us a line at podcaststardust@gmail.com. So if you have those constructive thoughts, or just any thoughts, if you have anything you'd like to add to the segment of The Force Awakens or any one of our episodes, you can drop us a line there. And then if you'd like to pick up one of our show logo designs on a plethora of different products, you can head over to the link in our show notes, and on RetroZap, that'll take you to TeePublic. And all of those designs, if you do purchase one, does help to support the show.
All right. You want to remind everybody what's going on with cosplay?
Sure. So as always, you can catch me at j.snips cosplay on my Instagram, where you can find me as a variety of different Star Wars characters, as well as some other fun things as well.
All right. So I would normally tell you what's upcoming on the show, but right now we are a little bit of flux as we are dealing with some unpredictability in our schedules. So Jay and I have been recording some stuff in advance, and I'm going to try and fill in some of the gaps with some rebroadcasts of older episodes, and I just don't know what those are yet. I'm leaning towards maybe some Mandalorian episodes, since we're getting close to the Mandalorian and Grogu release. But
Like that idea.
yeah, so we'll see what happens. It just depends on what my schedule for this week looks like. And don't be mysterious. It's just that I'm not ready to share all of our plans. But at any rate, so yeah, normally we'd be telling you what we're doing on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but just don't know yet. So I don't know when this is coming out. But so hang in there. We've still got coming up later this month our next episode in the Darth Bane series. We got more episodes of the Clone Wars we'll be talking about, our weekly news reviews, and the like. So with that, thanks for listening to all of our episodes and this episode of Podcast Stardust. Have a great week, and until next time, may the Force be